Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Tring Book Festival event. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I welcome to the stage the brilliant Gyles Brandreth?
Wow, that's fun. Thank you very much. Well done. Well, oh, how nice. Isn't this charming? And can we, while we're in applause mode, say how wonderful it is to have our bookshop and brilliant Ben and his wonderful team making all this happen. Fantastic. Well done, you. Yay. It's exciting that things are happening again, isn't it? They're all getting out and about. My world has been quite strange over the last 18 months. It's the reason I've been able to write a book, because we've all been locked up. But we're beginning to come out into the world, and I'm beginning to do some of the things that I haven't done in a long while. One of the things that I do when I'm not writing or touring a show is that I host awards ceremonies. And I'm back on the awards ceremony circuit, and I did the first bit of hosting 2 weeks ago, the first awards ceremony in 18 months. And it's one that I've been doing over about 15 years. People sometimes think that I'm joking when I say I host this award ceremony, but I don't. As you'll discover when you and if you read the book, I have a family connection with this particular industry. And for many years now, I have been hosting, and I again hosted it this year, the British Funeral Directors Awards. It's a jollier event than you might imagine. And I have to tell you, they hadn't had one for a couple of years and so on, but I hosted it about 3 weeks ago, and my goodness, they have had a brilliant year. I mean, no supply chain problems for them. I can tell you, absolutely none. And they were all, it was one of the merriest evenings I can remember, and it's an unusual event. Anyway, the Funeral Directors Awards, because they don't do it like a normal awards ceremony, as you know, because many of you will. We're in Tring, after all. You are all natural award winners. But if you have won an award, you'll know what happens. The name is announced, you go onto the stage, you collect your trophy, and then you return to your seat. That's the way it works. Not at the Funeral Directors Awards. Oh no. There, you go up to the stage, you collect your trophy, and then you're expected to shuffle slowly towards the back of the stage where the curtains part and you disappear behind them. And they have two big prizes at the end of the evening. One is for the crematorium of the year, known as the Creme de la Creme Award. And the other is the Lifetime Achievement Award for thinking outside the box. Yay! And in a way, this book is my lifetime achievement because it's a sort of autobiography. It's really a childhood memoir. And it came about because of lockdown. You may remember whenever it was, 18 months ago or more, was it February, was it March last year? Anyway, we were suddenly told we were all being locked down, and nobody quite knew what that meant. And if you were of my vintage, you were sort of terrified and being told, you may never come out again. And the sort of the grandchildren could press their faces against the window to see you. And you recall, we were allowed out briefly for recreation, a sort of short 20-minute walk. We had to avoid other people. Remember all that? Well, I thought, what am I going to do? Because I'd been due to go on tour. I'd been due, in fact, to do a stage show in London with the great Dame Judy Dench. That was put on hold. And then I was supposed to go on tour with a show about the theatre, and that was put on hold. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I better write a book. And I decided that I would write a sort of autobiography, but I had reservations about it. The reason I chose to do an autobiography was that I had all the material in the house. I couldn't go out to research it, but I thought I've kept everything. And I have kept everything. I'm one of those people. Downstairs, in the basement of our house, there's a room that is as wide as this, and there are boxes, quite they're about 40 boxes, going back to 1959, or maybe more than 40, full of all my stuff. every postcard I received, every letter I received, school reports, sweet papers, I mean literally, railway tickets, anything and everything, menus, I've kept it all. I started keeping a diary in 1959, so there's all this material there. So it was all in the house. I have to tell you, when I go though, my wife has told me that she has got the Skip, local Skip company, on rapid dial. So even before she phones the undertakers, she will be phoning the Skip people to get all this junk. You wanting to leave already? I agree, it's not that interesting. Oh, I see. You're taking a picture. Well done. Okay, hold on, just going to pull the stomach in. That's it. You know? Very good. Anyway, so I thought I've got all the material here, and it's in my head, and I've been asked to do this. So I will do it. But I've been reluctant. I've been asked before to do an autobiography. And the reason I was reluctant is that I'd only just completed a biography of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, who, as you know, died in the spring of this year. And I've been working on that book in anticipation of his 100th birthday, which would have fallen in June of this year. But obviously when he became ill, I had to revise it, and it has appeared. It's called Philip the Final Portrait. And having got to know Prince Philip, because I was the chairman of one of his favorite charities, the National Playing Fields Association, the first charity that he took on when he married Princess Elizabeth, as she then was, back in 1947. Having been the chairman of this charity, I got to know this most unusual and remarkable person. And I've written this book about him. Initially, a biography at his invitation. He needed one, and he got me to do it. And I did it. But he didn't like talking about himself. And his rule in life was don't talk about yourself. He really impressed this on me. He said his philosophy was to look up and look out, not look down and look in. And I know he told his children, don't talk about yourself. Nobody's interested in you. They really aren't. Talk about, they're interested in themselves. Talk about them, not about you. So I can tell you, for example, there's no question that he was a huge admirer of his grandson, Prince Harry, the achievement of the Invictus Games, Prince Harry's military service. But he would have regarded it as, and I can quote, madness to give an interview to somebody like Oprah Winfrey, or to write a sort of soul-searching autobiography. Complete madness. He could not see the point of it, and would have been concerned, distressed, that Prince Harry should think of doing such a thing. But that reflects the generation that Prince Philip belonged to, and it reflects the generation that Prince Harry belonged to. Prince Philip was very interested in military history, and he'd read several biographies of the Emperor Napoleon. And in one of them, he showed me a quotation by Napoleon, in which Napoleon said, if you want to understand a man, you should consider what the world was like in the year that man turned 21. And Prince Philip turned 21 in 1942. And he reflected absolutely the qualities, the strengths, the values, the sense of humor, the attitude of that generation, the best generation in many ways. He was a man of 1942 all his life. That's the kind of person he was. And that was his strength. Now, of course, Prince Harry was 21 in a very different year. I was 21 in a very different year. And it's interesting to reflect. You might think about this later. Do you actually, are your values and attitudes, do they reflect what the world was like in the year you turned 21? Because sometimes I don't feel totally at home in the modern world. And I know Prince Philip certainly found a lot of the modern world extremely aggravating. But that's because his attitudes, he was formed in 1942. In fact, the year that he was mentioned in dispatches. He didn't think an autobiography was a good idea. He was a stickler for sticking to the facts. And he said, once you start writing things, you start misremembering things. I mean, he found he had this extraordinary childhood, Prince Philip. As you may know, he was born in Greece, but he went into exile with his parents when he was only a baby. And he had 4 older sisters. But the whole family split up. They lived in France, in Paris. They split up before Prince Philip was 10 years of age. His sisters had then married different German princes. They were a generation older than him. And his parents split. His mother had a mental breakdown, ended up in an asylum. And his father floated down to the south of France, where he ended up living on a yacht with a girlfriend. And Prince Philip, I took the book to him before it was published, and he went through the proofs. He said, what's this you got about my father floating down to the south of France? I said, well, I was trying to convey the fact, sir, that your father was something of a boulevardier, enjoyed a glass of wine and a well-turned ankle. And I thought by saying that he floated down to the south of France, expressed that quite deftly, but discreetly, so that was my idea. He said, my father did not float down to the south of France. My father went by train. And he would not accept that there was anything unusual about his childhood. The fact that his parents split up in this way, that he didn't hear from his mother for several years when she was in the asylum. Not a Christmas card, not a birthday card, no communication of any kind. He wouldn't complain about this. He just said, well, these things happen. You just got to get on with it. And he wouldn't talk about it. That was not his approach. He wasn't introspective. He was outward looking. He was very interested in the works of Carl Jung. His mother, actually, was treated by Sigmund Freud, among others. But Prince Philip was very interested in Jung, and he showed me some work of Jung, where Jung had looked back on the case histories of his patients, and had come to the conclusion that the patients who had the happiest outcomes were the people who were indeed looking up and out, people who were interested in the world beyond themselves, in art, in nature, in science, in the world outside themselves. The people who were looking downwards and inwards, who were introspective, were the least happy. And that was Prince Philip's approach to life, and indeed has been the Queen's approach to life. But I have to say, his stickling for accuracy could get me down at times. I remember him saying, what's this you've got in the war? You say I served on HMS Ramillies. Well, I said, you did serve on HMS Ramillies, sir. You certainly, sir. He said, I did not serve on HMS Ramillies. I said, you absolutely served on HMS. He said, I did not serve on HMS. I said, you gave me the logbook, sir. You served on HMS Ramillies. He said, I did not serve on HMS Ramillies. I served in HMS Ramillies. You don't live on your house, do you? You live in your house, stupid bugger. He was also a very funny man. He was the man who said, if ever you see a man opening the car door for his wife, it's either a new car or a new wife. So that was one of the reasons I was reluctant to do an autobiography, because I just finished writing this book about Prince Philip and his extraordinary life, his extraordinary story. So he was still going around in my head, and he was to me a bit of a hero and a role model, though I think my portrait of him is a warts and all portrait. And what was interesting is he did read it, and any factual inaccuracies he put a correction, or if something he disagreed with, he simply put in the margin, no. But any of the personal stuff he simply ignored. He made no comment of any kind. So it is a full portrait of a most remarkable human being. But of course, it was me writing a biography about him, which is very different from writing a book about yourself. Anyway, I thought, I've been asked to do this, I'm locked in this room, I better get on with it. And there I was, sitting, literally writing the opening paragraph of this book on whatever that day was in March. It was the day after the lockdown, that's when I started it, when my wife came into the room, and she said to me, well, the first thing she said to me was, sit up. Which does remind me, this is the moment for me to actually remember that I've got an orange between my shoulder blades, and I'm squeezing it so the juice runs. You see, doesn't that improve the posture immediately? You know, she's right about everything. The four most important words in the English language are these: listen to your wife. Gentlemen, please take a note. Anyway, she said, after she said sit up, she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing a book. She said, oh no, not another one, Gyles. Does the world really need another book by you? And I said, well, she said, why? I said, we need the money. She said, And it's true, we do need the money. The truth is, you know, we have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. We've discovered over the years that money is the one thing keeping us in touch with them. So she couldn't argue with that. And she couldn't argue with the fact that I had all the material in the house and I had the contract. And so she said, well, if you've got to do it, I suppose so. So it's going to be a book about you. You're going to be the person who puts me into memoir, are you? I said, well, she said, well, if you're going to do this, she said, try not to fall back on all the old predictable stuff, the teddy bears and the woolly jumpers and how you love words and all the usual stuff. Try and go a bit deeper. Try and work out who you are and why you are who you are. And that gave me a clue to how I might approach the book, because it suddenly occurred to me, I want to make this book interesting to other people. And I thought, well, if I can work out who made me, maybe people, when they're reading this, it'll make them think, who made them the people they are? And at the end of this journey, the writing of this book, and I know there are people who during lockdown thought, well, maybe actually I'll write a family memoir. You know, I've got the opportunity, maybe this is the time to do it. Not necessarily for publication, but maybe for the children, the grandchildren. I'll give it a go. It's an interesting project, but if you haven't started it yet, I caution you. It's not necessarily as comfortable as you think it's going to be. I found it actually quite disturbing at times and quite distressing at times, examining myself and who I was, and particularly looking back on what I've done and who my family were, and all that wasn't totally easy. And of course I have, as a result, discovered actually who made me who I am. In your case, think about this. Who made you? Is it your parents? Is it your family? Is it certain school teachers? Is it the person you've lived with for most of your life? Is it your siblings? Is it the work you've done? Where you were? What has made you the person that you are today? And that's the journey I took. And I think what makes the book interesting is, as you read it, you will think, well, actually, do my forebears affect me? I'm very much the product, I think, three sources of who I am. One of them is my forebears, the people who came before me, people I've never met, but who are very much part and parcel of my life, if you read the book. People whose paintings I have of them, or stories I've heard about them, and they range, great variety of people, from one great-grandfather who was the keeper of the poorhouse in Bradford, to another great-grandfather who was one of the richest people in the world. Unfortunately, he had a lot of children. None of the money trickled down to us, but nonetheless, he was an interesting figure. And there was Jeremiah Brandreth, the last person to be beheaded for treason in this country, 1817. I will be passing among you later, so you may touch my garb. There is an element of living history here. So my forebears have affected me, and of course, my parents. I'm very much the product of my parents. And the book is called Odd Boy Out, because I'm this little fellow in the middle here. And my publisher thought that's a good title, goes with the picture, and you're a bit of an oddity. I rather, I think, wanted to call the book, I Hope There Is a Heaven. Because as I was writing the book, I kept thinking, oh, I hope there's a heaven. I'd love them to know how this story ended. And I'd love them to know how grateful I was and how pleased I was to have known them. And how, particularly in the case of certain teachers and my parents, people to whom I never actually said thank you. My parents are key to this story, as your parents will be to you. And in my case, in a wholly good way. I had lovely parents. My mother was born in India, and that affected her life completely. She was the daughter of a missionary and an Indian Army officer. She left India when she was 20, but she never really left India at all. India was her north, her south, her east, her west. And she lived her life in England, but she was still really in India. The smells, the colors, the food, and she could speak Hindi as well. And indeed, when she was dying, one of the porters was taking her to the little private room where she died, aged 96, not that long ago. She was able to chat to him and say thank you to him in Hindi, which was nice for her, and I think nice for him. But she was never really comfortable in England, except in the England that she had been brought up on. So if it was an England that had been described in magazines you might have read, if you were part of the English Raj, you know, in the equivalent of the Field or Country Life or the Nursery World, then she was comfortable there. Which is why, for example, we lived in London, and she would take me to Harrods to get my hair cut. She knew that Harrods was the right place to be. If you were going to have name tapes, they had to be Cash's name tapes. She did things properly. My sisters all went to Cheltenham Ladies' College. But if she was outside of those safe parameters, she felt insecure. I only realized this now, looking back. Never occurred to me at the time. I never thought about why she was so often found lying in bed all day, asking for another hot water bottle. It didn't occur to me that she might be depressed. You don't think about it when you're a little boy, do you? So I didn't really understand her until after she died and I began writing this book. But she was a lovely, lovely lady. And she had a very good marriage with my father. who's a remarkable person, and you will read about in the book, and the book is really a kind of love letter to him, in a way. It's Philip Larkin who wrote that notorious poem about parents, and I do a paraphrase of that poem. And my poem begins, "They tuck you up, your mum and dad." Because that's what my parents did for me. They tucked me up. They made me feel cozy and warm and safe and secure. They read me stories. They recited poetry to me. They gave me my love of language. My father was a lawyer, a successful lawyer. They were very middle class. I come from a middle class background, totally middle class, not upper middle class. My sisters, none of them were debutantes, not lower middle class. We never called a napkin a serviette. We were absolutely middle class. And my father was, as I say, a successful solicitor, but the one problem in his life is that he spent a little bit too much money every year. Not in a bad way, wasn't extravagant at all. My parents were not extravagant people, but just living a middle class life. My mother expected us all to go to a boarding school, so we did, but the fees are expensive. And my mother liked the idea of a foreign holiday, as well as the bucket and spade holiday, and these come at a price. So my father every year spent a little bit more than he earned. And cumulatively, this is a bad thing to do. Well, it really is. And he was bedeviled by financial worries for the whole of his life. He died age only 71, literally because I think he'd run out of money. He reached the end of his rope, couldn't tie a knot and hang on, so he died. He also died at 71 because when he was 17, he went to, it was in Margate, he went to Dreamland in Margate, and in a tent there, a lady told his fortune, looked at his line of life, he said, "Oh, he was only 17, lovely long line of life. You're going to fulfill your 70 years and 10, as it says in the Bible, +1. He's only 17, seems like a lot, 71. But as I grew up, I remember him saying to me, "Oh, I'm going to die at 71, the lady and the fortune teller told me." And indeed, when he got to 71, within a week, he was indeed dead. I have two recollections, vivid recollections of him. The best of them, I think, is when I was a very little boy, about the age in this picture, I suppose 2 or 3 years of age, sitting in the family Volkswagen, little yellow Volkswagen, going along an A road, and on his lap, I was in the car, I always sat on his lap, wherever we went on holiday, whenever, I always sat on his lap all the way, no seat belts. Oh, these were happy days. And I was allowed to, help him steer. And then I steered all on my own when he was lighting his cigarette. So that's a very, very happy recollection. But a less happy recollection is when I was a bit older, in our flat in London, going to bed. My bedroom was just beyond the kitchen. Passing the kitchen in the evening and seeing him sitting at the green Formica kitchen table, smoking a cigarette with a cup of tea, and all the bills laid out on the table, trying to sort them out, in which order to pay them. To see, if I pay this one now, and I don't need to pay that for a week, and writing the letters to the schools, asking for a few weeks' grace before paying the school fees, trying to negotiate that extra bit of overdraft from the bank at the right rate. He was bedeviled by financial worries. And my heart always, when I was an MP, I felt this particularly, but it does all the time, my heart goes out to anybody with money worries. There's nothing that eats away at you more than money worries. So those were these lovely people, and these problems of theirs, of course, as a child, I was not aware of, because I had 3 older sisters who were all born before the Second World War, and I came along a few years after the Second World War. And so I was the first boy, and I was the golden child. Indeed, if I'd been a girl, I was going to be called Mercedes, because a Mercedes is what my father really wanted. When I was a boy, I was called Gyles. It's an old family name, and I was the golden child. And I was brought up like a golden child, as if I was a miracle and just could do anything. And indeed, I think the reason in my life I've done a great variety of things, lots and lots of different things, is because my parents brought me up to believe I could do anything. And it came as a real shock to me when I went to Fulham Baths for the first time to learn to swim. I didn't think there was any need. I walked off the edge and sank. So that's the upside of being totally loved. I was absolutely, unreservedly loved and admired by my parents, and they believed that I was a little miracle. I'm surprised I wasn't discovered in bulrushes or in a manger somewhere. Anyway, there I was, this little miracle child who could do anything and was allowed to do anything, and consequently was a little bit spoiled. And the upside of bringing up your child like that is they believe they can do everything and anything. So I've spent my life giving everything a go because I've assumed that I could do it. The downside is you have a sense of entitlement that can be dangerous. Speaking of Moses and the bulrushes, I remember in the 1980s, I worked at TVAM, breakfast television station, and sitting on the sofa being interviewed was the great Charlton Heston, huge film star in the 1950s and 1960s. 1950s, the highest paid, most famous film star in the world. And he was sitting there, and I sat down next to him on the sofa. I was one of the presenters, and I put my cup of coffee down on the table in front of us, and immediately Charlton Heston picked it up and began drinking from it. He simply assumed that everything that came within his remit was for him. It's a sense of entitlement that I've noticed among film stars. If you treat them like that, that's the way you learn to behave. He simply assumed anything brought within his reach was for him. And so it was for me. I just assumed that. I think I learned finally that wasn't going to be the case. It was at Oxford University. And I went to Oxford and I assumed I was going to do all the things that my father told me I should do at Oxford, like be editor of the university magazine, direct the University Dramatic Society, become president of the Oxford Union, the Debating Society. And I did all these things in quick succession. But the first of them was to be the editor of the university magazine. So on day one of being at Oxford, I went and found the then editor of the magazine, to introduce myself and to invite him to invite me to write articles for him. And I turned up, and I was, first of all, the first thing that surprised me was to find that he lived in a flat, not in the college room. But he was 2 or 3 years older than me, and he had a flat. And even more extraordinary, he had a wife. He was only about 20, 21, and there was this beautiful girl, aged about 19, 20, who was his wife. And of course, this reminds us of a different era. And I think what's interesting about this book is that if you're somebody of my vintage, it will be a trip down memory lane. But if you're a younger person, it's history. And of course, when I was writing about this, of course, I remember the time before the advent of the pill, when people who got together, boyfriends and girlfriends, didn't automatically sleep together. It just didn't happen. It sometimes did happen, but it didn't happen universally. And people didn't live together. It was called living in sin. It was a different world. And what was interesting for me is I've simply written it up as it was. I've not been judgmental. I've not said this was a good thing or a bad thing. I've just said this is what happened. And of course, these young people, they got married. And indeed, if you look at the statistics now, people of my children's generation, they get married in their 20s. But people of my generation before would get married in their early 20s or late teens. And so it was with this couple. Anyway, I met this young man, this student, this friend of mine, as he became, and he very kindly invited me to write an article, but I rather took a fancy to his wife. And it was only a month or two later when we were at a party hosted by, wait for it, Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was a local member of Parliament, and he also had children at the university at the same time as me, and we were friends of these people, and one of his children worked on this magazine, was the treasurer of the magazine, and so we went to Robert Maxwell's house for this party. Anyway, at this party, I was flirting with my friend's wife, and my friend called me away and said, "You can't do that." Right? And I thought, And then he hit me and knocked me over. And I think that was the moment when I suddenly realized that actually a sense of entitlement is not necessarily a good thing. So this is a book where I learn things. It's a book a little bit about growing up. And it is a book that begins, of course, with my first memories, which are the early 1950s. I remember I had a little radio set in my bed, and I listened. The voices that I grew up on were the voices of people like Frankie Howard, Kenneth Williams, June Whitfield on the radio, Jimmy Edwards, programs that I loved listening to on the radio. We had a television as well. We got it in 1953 for the coronation. We didn't buy it. We rented it from Radio Rentals. It was in a lovely sort of oak set, with quite a small screen, black and white, 1950. ITV was introduced in 1955. But remember, we were middle class. We didn't have ITV. We simply had BBC. I loved the Coronation, of course. I loved children's programs. I tell you, my favorite children's program. I know it's different now. The world has changed. Now, there isn't children's television the same way. Young people nowadays, kids, what do? Well, when they're not, photographing their private parts to Snapchat to their chums, they're playing with Minecraft and all these other games. It was a more innocent age. My favorite program on television in the 1950s was The Adventures of Billy Bunter of Greyfriars School. Billy Bunter, the fat owl of the remove, a naughty schoolboy. Young people find this hard to believe, but there's a young girl here today who I was meeting earlier, I think Emma's her name, and I ought to explain to her that Billy Bunter of Greyfriars School was as famous in the 1950s as Harry Potter and Hogwarts are today, truly. There's a difference, of course, between Harry Potter and Billy Bunter. The theme in Harry Potter is magic. The theme in Billy Bunter was obesity. But in those days, a fat child was more of a novelty than perhaps today. I don't know. And he was a very naughty fat boy, and he loved him. It was just basically half an hour of us laughing as this child stuffed his face full of cream puffs and jam tarts. And I loved it when he had a big chocolate cake and he cut out a slice and then picked up the rest of the cake to eat. And then in the show, we loved it too when he was beaten at the end. We loved that bit. There was another show that involved a lot of beating that I loved called Wacko, which starred Jimmy Edwards. And Wacko, it was about set in a school. Jimmy Edwards, the headmaster of the school, and it was called Wacko. Again, young people find this impossible to believe because it was all about the whacking of children. That was the theme of the show. The theme music, in fact, was in time to the whacking of the cane. And it opened with this man, Jimmy Edwards, flexing his cane. And essentially, it was half an hour of late middle-aged men beating the backsides of little boys. That's what the show was. God, it was good. And people just don't believe that this is true, what I'm telling them. But it is true. You can actually go to YouTube, and if you do go to YouTube to see it, I advise you to use somebody else's computer. But that is the way the world was. The world has changed. We went to the cinema as well. I remember going to the first film that I remember seeing, 1958, Tiger Bay, with Hayley Mills, and I just fell in love with this girl. It was just mesmerizing. Hayley Mills, of course, she's written a wonderful book herself this year called Forever Young, which I do recommend to you. But she was a big child star at the time. Anybody you know called Hayley is called Hayley because of Hayley Mills. It wasn't a girl's name until Hayley Mills came along. She won an Oscar in the early 1960s. I saw all her films. We went to musicals as well. I remember going to see Gigi in the 1950s with Leslie Caron. And playing the older man in the film was Maurice Chevalier, who sang this song. Thank heaven for little girls. For little girls get bigger every day. Now he would be arrested. But in those days, I mean, he was a hero, the most famous Frenchman in the world. My parents took me to see him at the Savoy Theatre in London. They took me to see lots of wonderful shows. They took me to see comedy, straight play. They introduced me to Shakespeare. I saw a lot of Shakespeare on screen. The great films made by Laurence Olivier, Richard III, Hamlet, Henry V, I love those. But they took me to the Old Vic. 1960, my first Romeo and Juliet. It was a school's matinee. Parents and their children went there. And it was Romeo and Juliet, directed by Franco Zeffirelli. The young Romeo was John Stride, and the young Juliet was the very young Judy Dench. And it, as I say, a school's matinee. Parents, children. In fact, my parents were there. Judy Dench's parents were actually there. And I remember the production so vividly because when Judy Dench ran onto the stage at the beginning, the kind of white nightie, she ran towards the nurse. The nurse, played by Peggy Mount. Anyway, she ran towards the nurse and her opening line was, "Where are my mother and my father, nurse?" and a voice from the sixth row of the stalls called out, "Here we are, darling, row G." What's funny, thinking about the young Judy Dench and Haley Mills and indeed Leslie Caron, over the years I've been very lucky that I've met so many of my childhood heroes and heroines. And I'll come back to that a little bit later, why it is that I met them. But I met them, and I have to say, I've known a lot of very beautiful actresses, but not one of them in my long life has ever made any kind of overture towards me. I've never been, no. I have known a huge number of very beautiful actresses. I have never been propositioned by one of them. The only two people who've ever propositioned me in that way were Jimmy Edwards and Frankie Howard. They're quite funny stories. You'll find them in the book. Also, of course, I was propositioned at my prep school, but that's a different matter entirely. I was sent away to a boarding school, not because my parents didn't like me, they loved me, but because that's what was done. That was the middle class expectation. And so I went to this prep school. I wasn't there for very long. I was just there until the school was closed down and the staff all arrested. That's not entirely true. I exaggerate there. In fact, there was only, the school was not closed down, and only one member of staff should have been arrested, but he wasn't. It was a different world. It was a boys' school, so when he was discovered, he was sent away to a local girls' school where he might do less harm. That was the idea. A different world. And in fact, the school was a very good school and influenced me in two ways. One major way. The headmaster, almost my first day at the school, he went in to see the headmaster. He was an old man called Mr. Stocks, 82 years of age. And I can remember what he said. This was the year that I began writing my diary, and I wrote it down at the time. And he gave each boy some words of advice on your first day at the school. And to me, he simply said this: Brandreth, busy people are happy people. Remember that. Busy people are happy people. Remember that. And I always have. From that day to this, I've been a busy person. It's why I'm in Tring today. Tring, Tring. Because busy people are happy people. And that's why I keep doing things. I'm scurrying about. My wife will say, busy fool. Nonetheless, I have been busy from that day to this day. And my observation is that on the whole, busy people are happy people. It's a point of view that definitely was shared by the Duke of Edinburgh, and indeed is shared by the Queen. You may marvel at the Queen, and we do all marvel at the Queen. 95 in the 96th year, driven, as we know, by duty, sustained by faith, but keeping going against doctor's orders, because she knows that busy people are happy people. Actually, it's better to be doing something than doing nothing. Busy, that's why we're here today. You could have actually have sat at home when you looked out of the window, you thought, oh, maybe we will. But no, you actually decided we'd better do something. And on the whole, when we get back at the end of the day, we say, well, actually, I'm glad we went out in the end. Busy people are happy people. So I learned that from Mr. Stocks. But there was another teacher in the school who I really loved called Major Douch. Now, Major Douch was a lovely man. He taught us Latin, not very well. No, really not very well. For many years I thought in loco parentis meant my dad's an engine driver. But we loved Major Douch because Major Douch had a good friend from his days in the army. And Major Douch's best friend, really from his army days, was an actor, then a young actor, and later a very famous actor, but already a well-known actor, and it was the young Roger Moore, later 007. The James Bond. And he was then starring in a television series called The Saint. And imagine our excitement, boys aged 10, 11, when down to the school to visit Major Douch of a weekend, came in his fast sports car, Roger Moore. Wow, fabulous. And he was, I have to tell you, the most charming, good-looking, delightful human being you can imagine. He was absolutely wonderful, and with a great self-deprecating sense of humor. And I was lucky enough to meet him again in later life and to get to know him. And he knew I wanted to be an actor, and he said he'd help if he could. And I said, well, look, Roger, I've read these amusing interviews you give where you say all you ever got to offer any director who wants you in a movie is you've only got two looks for the camera. One is left eyebrow up and the other is right eyebrow up. I said, if it's that easy, can you teach me? And Roger Moore said, well, I'll give it a go. And Roger Moore gave me a masterclass in raising my eyebrows. He taught me. And as you can see, quite effective left eyebrow work there. You know, I could get the left eyebrow up, but I couldn't get the right eyebrow up. I really worked hard. Left eyebrow, no problem. Right eyebrow, just couldn't do it. So eventually I said to Roger, Roger, this is not going very well. I'm managing to get the left eyebrow up, but I just can't get the right eyebrow up. What do you think is the trouble? He said, it's very simple, Gyles. It seems you're half the actor I am. There's a fun picture of Roger Moore, well, two in the book, one of him and Major Douch in their army days, and there's also one of Roger giving me that masterclass in raising your eyebrows. Lovely man. In fact, I thought of him only this morning, because before we came to Tring, and of course we arrive early because rather amusingly, the Tring railway station is somewhere just beyond Hemel Hempstead. Sorry to think that the people from Ryanair decided where to put your railway station. Anyway, so quite early we set off, and I needed to stop at a chemist to get some Strepsils, because I thought my voice is going. And in the chemist shop, as I was closing the door of the chemist shop, there was one of those advertisements hanging on the back of the door, and it mentioned Roger Moore, which is why I'm mentioning it now, and it was an advertisement for Viagra. Yeah, and it said, Viagra. It won't make you Sean Connery, but it might make you Roger Moore. Anyway, I left this school and I went to another school, a co-educational boarding school in Hampshire called Bedales, another boarding school. And I loved this school because it had lots of theatrical connotations, and I loved that. I mean, for example, when I was arriving at the school, when I was leaving the school, Daniel Day-Lewis was arriving. My best friend at the school was an actor called Simon Cadell. You may remember him from Heidi High. But they had an interesting theatrical heritage too. Oscar Wilde, great playwright, author of The Importance of Being Earnest, he had sent his eldest son to this school when it was founded in 1893. And the school's founder, who was a friend of Oscar Wilde, a man called John Badley, was still alive all these years later when I arrived at the school in the 1960s. And so I met this old gentleman who was then in his late 90s. He lived to be 102, born 1865, died 1967, John Badley. And I knew this old gentleman. I used to play Scrabble with him every Wednesday afternoon in his cottage in the school grounds. And he was a most delightful person. But it's very exciting to me to be able to share with you the fact that I was a friend of a man who was a friend of Oscar Wilde. I've shaken the hand that shook the hand that held the pen that wrote The Importance of Being Earnest. I'm just mentioning that because when we finished here, I shall be seated out there signing books. And if you do choose to buy one of the books, you may shake my hand. And then you too will have shaken the hand that shook the hand that held the pen that wrote The Importance of Being Earnest. I mean, they get a lot of good people here, does Big Boy Ben at the Tring Book Festival, but I don't think anybody else can offer you that, okay? I mean, Nadia's got a lot to offer. She may well indeed bring you a lovely scone or two. And Pam has got some amusing ditties to give you on Tuesday night. But they cannot offer you, at one remove, Oscar Wilde, which I can and will with pleasure. There is a bit of name dropping in the book, to put it mildly. And we might explore why. One of that mentioning of handshakes, I was lucky enough, I wrote a play about A.A. Milne, the man who created those Winnie the Pooh stories, Christopher Robin stories. And I wrote it with Julian Slade, the person who wrote Salad Days. And the reason I wrote it with Julian Slade, the person who wrote Salad Days, is when I was a child, Salad Days was my favorite musical. It's the Queen's favorite musical, incidentally. You'll find that out in the Prince Philip book. And But what's interesting there is it was my favorite musical as a child. So when I wanted to write a musical, I thought, oh, my favorite musical was Saturdays. And I discovered where Julian Slade was living. I went to see him, and we wrote a show together. And as a result of writing the show, we met Christopher Robin, the real Christopher Robin. You know, born 1920, the person for whom those stories were written, 1926 or 28. He became a friend of mine. He was a bookseller too, Christopher Robin Milne. Madam, you may shake my hand. You're now shaking the hand that shook the hand that held the paw of Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, yeah. You know, Jess Phillips, Ed Balls, they can give you Keir Starmer at 2 removes. I'm giving you. It's up to you, entirely up to you. Anyway, so I have to say that my son said to me the other day, oh, Dad, you've got to stop telling that Oscar Wilde shaking hands. I said, why? He said, oh, Dad. I said, no, why? I like telling a story. I'm very proud of it. And I said, I'm the president of the Oscar Wilde Society. Oscar Wilde's most fascinating character, complex life. He said, Dad, just stop telling the story. I said, why? He said, well, Dad, don't you remember when I was at Cambridge? My son was at Cambridge University. He said, I said, of course I remember you were at Cambridge. Of course I remember. It took 20 years of countdown to pay for it. He said, don't you remember my tutor, my old tutor, Dr. Tanner? And I said, yes, I do remember Dr. Tanner, the old gentleman. He said, yeah, well, he said, Dr. Tanner told me, this is my son speaking, Dr. Tanner told me that he, Dr. Tanner, when he was young in the 1920s or 1930s, had an affair, a liaison, a relationship, a love affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, Bosie. Yeah, the lover of Oscar Wilde. So, said my son, Dad, I can say I've shaken the hand that shook the hand that shook. I said, don't go there, boy. But what is interesting about these stories, and it's relevant in a way, is that these famous people that were my childhood, I went out of my way sometimes to find them, as well as them finding me. It was by chance that at this prep school when I was, complete by chance that Roger Moore turned up. It was complete by chance that somebody 10 years older than me was our athletic coach, who turned out to be, eventually to become, Jeffrey Archer. Who could run very fast then and has had to be able to run pretty fast ever since. But he's a lovely fellow and a great storyteller. Anyway, some of these encounters were chance encounters. Others, though, were people I sought out. And I remember, for example, when I was at this school, Bedales, it was very near Chichester, not far from Chichester, where in the early 1960s they'd built the Chichester Festival Theatre. And in those days, the beginning of the theatre, the artistic director was the great Sir Laurence Olivier, who was my hero. I'd seen his films of Hamlet, Richard III, Henry V. And I went to see all the plays there, either with the school or on my own. And he was appearing there in the 2nd or 3rd year of him running it, in Othello. And I went to a matinee and I thought, today's the day I'm going to try to collect Sir Laurence Olivier's autograph. So after the performance, I stationed myself by the stage door and watched the actors coming out, and out they came. Maggie Smith, Derek Jacobi, various actors in the company, Frank Finlay. No sign of Laurence Olivier. Well, he was playing Othello, a lot of makeup to take off. I waited. And after a few minutes, I realized, looking through the stage door, that the stage doorkeeper was no longer at his post. So boldly, with the boldness of youth, I sneaked myself through the stage door. And if you know the Chichester Festival Theatre, you'll know it's built in the round. So there was this narrow, semicircular corridor backstage, and I was walking along it, past rails of costumes. It was quite narrow. When I realized coming towards me was a figure, not very tall, wearing a fawn-colored raincoat and a hat and glasses, but it was clearly Sir Laurence Olivier. And he stopped, and I looked up. I was holding my autograph book. He saw that I was a schoolboy with an autograph. He signed it. And then he said to me, where are you at school? So I said, I'm at Bedales, sir. He said, oh, Bedales. My first wife went to Bedales. And his first wife, Jill Esmond, had been to this school. I thought, oh, I'm in. His first wife went to the same school. Then he looked at me and said, I take it you want to be an actor? I said, oh, yes, I want to be an actor. He said, would you like to see the stage? And so Laurence Olivier the most famous actor in the world, put his hand on my shoulder and led me through one door, through another door, across the wings and onto the stage of the Chichester Festival Theatre. And we stood there together, side by side. And he said to me, when you come onto the stage for the first time, make sure they can see your eyes. Most important, that everybody should have the opportunity to see your eyes. So scan the whole auditorium, start at the top and work your way down. Whatever you do, do not miss anybody out. He said, I take it you're in the school play. I said, yes, I'm in the school play. He said, in the school play, where do you come on from? I said, I just come on. He said, you can't just come on. You want to be noticed, don't you? I said, oh, I do want to be noticed. He said, well, if you want to be noticed, he said, I suggest you come on backwards. They always notice the fellow who comes on backwards. He said, come on backwards, but waving into the wings, you see? So you're waving to somebody off stage like that. And the movement of your arm will attract their attention. So their eyes will be on you as you come on. And they'll be thinking, who is this interesting fellow coming on with his back to us? And then when you turn around, they'll see your eyes. And you'll see theirs. You will be noticed. I said, oh, that's brilliant, sir. That's I'll definitely do that. Oh, what about you, sir? What would you do if you were in the school play? He said, oh, I'm Laurence Olivier. I can come on anywhere. And I tell you that story because in a way, it illustrates something in the book. And that is that I think and my wife will tell you this, that I was formed during my childhood. It was my forebears, it was my parents, it was not my siblings. My sisters were older than me. I felt like an only child. It was my school teachers. It was the influences of my childhood that have made me who I am. And my wife sometimes says to me, Gyles, it's rather sad. There's been no development in your life. No development of any kind. I mean, you're just doing now what you did as a school, and it's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. You know, I was editor of the school magazine. I went on to be an editor on national newspapers. I was in the school debating society. I went on to be a member of parliament. I was in the school plays. I've gone on acting. I used to love dressing up. There's lots of funny pictures of me in funny costumes, and I'm still wearing these silly jumpers. You know, there's been no progress of any kind. What I am now is what I was formed as when I was a child, when I was at school, or when I was at university. There's been no development since. I worked out who it was who made me. And as you read this book, I hope you will work out who it is who has made you. I think that's what makes it interesting. My wife says that's rather sad. She said, your shadows cast this long shadow over your whole life. And I said, no, I think actually I've lived my whole life in a sunlit garden. I have no complaints at all. It's a good place to be. And luckily for me, I've managed to find all these people from my childhood and make them come to life in the grown-up world. And that's been completely fantastic to me. When I was a little boy, my mother had a calendar on the kitchen, on the fridge. And it was the National Playing Fields Association calendar, which it was a big teacher had this calendar. And there were pictures of the Duke of Edinburgh on every page. And so when I was a little boy, I saw pictures of this person, the Duke of Edinburgh. And eventually, of course, I got to meet him, and I became chairman of one of his charities and wrote his biography. So all these people, I saw the Queen, when I was 3, and then I found myself actually writing about the Queen, meeting the Queen, spending time going on tour with her, as you'll discover in the book. All these people from my childhood, Judy Dench, I saw her when I was a little boy in Romeo and Juliet. We now do this show together called I Remember It Well, which we were going to do in the West End, but we've done it in different theatres, where I talk to her about her career, and we sing songs together, and it's great fun. And she's even let us do a little bit of Romeo and Juliet together, so that at least I can say that I've played Romeo to Judy Dench's Juliet. So I'm not complaining about any of it. It's completely marvelous. So it's all been very, very good. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to leave the stage and position myself at the back now. And you can come, if you're bold enough, do ask for the handshake. You can have either the Oscar Wilde handshake or the Winnie the Pooh handshake. They're both the same, but the emotion is slightly different. and I'll sign a book. And I want you to know, I'm not proud. I'll sign anything you like. I mean, Merry Christmas. Those of you who are forward-looking, Happy Easter. And I really am not proud. I've signed my own name. But if eBay is where it's destined for, I'm quite happy to put J.K. Rowling, because it will fetch a better price from your point of view. So I want you to know that I think books are, I want to salute Ben and his bookshop and this festival, because books are our friends. Writing a book, it's very personal. For me, this has been a hugely personal experience. Of the many books I've written, the most personal, of course, because it's about me. So you're throwing it onto the world, you want it to do well. But also, it's such a wonderful thing to be able to create a book. And I love doing it. And I love a proper book, a real book. I mean, please feel free to get it on Kindle, and the audio book is great fun. I've read it myself. But I love a book where there are, as there are in this book, rather wonderful end pages. At the front, it's my grandfather's family in 1890. And in the same position, the same pose, it's my family, as it were, 125 years later, in exactly the same pose, which is great. End papers. I love the smell of a book. I love the spine of a book. I love the bind. It's a wonderful thing. You know, the book is the great friend that you can rely on. You can take a book anywhere. You know, on the bus, on the train, on holiday, on a canal journey. Yes, I've been going on canal journeys with my friend Sheila Hancock. Lovely lady, aged 88. We also did Celebrity Gogglebox together. That was quite an experience. We both got hooked on Naked Attraction. I don't know how your lockdown was, but mine was pretty strange. Sitting with an 88-year-old lady who's trying to explain to me what a fanny flutter is. But a book is something you can take wherever you go. On holiday, you can go to bed with a book, you know, and that's lovely. As my wife often says to me, you know, men are very unreliable. They are fundamentally, my wife says, men are unreliable. They either run off with the secretary or they die on you. And they do. Many of my wife's girlfriends are now widows. And it's true. She said, but you know, the book doesn't die on you. The book is there. It is your companion. And as my wife says, you can go to bed with a book and not wake up with a sexually transmitted disease. You know where you are with a book. So the point is this: I shall be sitting back there with my book until every single copy has been sold. Poor old Mr. Sale coming along later, I'll still be there flogging. And as dawn rises over Hemel Hempstead, I shall still be there signing. And because I do realize you've used the last of your petrol to get here today. You don't want to have to go out and do any more shopping between now and Christmas. Today is the day to do it. But I'm going to end, if I may, on a serious note with a little poem, because books are our friends, and friends are everything. Laughter's important too, and the occasional tear. And I hope you'll find in my book lots of laughs, lots of stories, my parents, lots of famous people, and a few tears along the way as well. From Quiet Homes, this is 4 lines by Hilaire Belloc. When I was a little boy, I used to learn his cautionary tales, you know. Lord Finchley tried to mend the electric light. It struck him dead and serve him right. It is the business of the wealthy man to give employment to the artisan. My favorite poem is a limerick, a very short limerick that goes like this. There once was a man from Peru whose limerick stopped at line 2. But this is a serious poem, and I thought I'd end with this. It's 4 lines by Hilaire Belloc. From quiet homes and first beginning, out to the undiscovered ends, there's nothing worth the wear of winning but laughter and the love of friends. Thank you for your laughter, and here's to our friendship.
Gyles Brandreth. Guess what? He'll be signing out there. So